In addition to being able to graph sine and cosine functions, we want to be able to take a graph and turn it into an equation. So as we look at the graph that we have here in the upper left corner, we have a maximum value of 3, we have a minimum value of -9. Then along the x-axis, we have our 4 points labeled as pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, pi, and 4 pi over 3. We want to be able to take this graph and turn it into an equation either of a sine or a cosine function. So the first thing that I'd want to be able to do is recognize, is this a sine or a cosine function? Sine functions, we remember, start at their midline. Cosine functions either start at their maximum value or their minimum value when on the y-axis. So looking at the graph that we have here, we're starting at the value of 3, which is the maximum. So first thing we know is that this is a cosine function. So if we know that this is a cosine function, we want to be able to write an equation that looks something like this right here. Y is equal to some value A, which was our amplitude, times by the cosine of, in parentheses, B times X, and then close the parenthesis, plus C. So again, A is our amplitude, our B value affects how long the period is, and our C value is our vertical shift, either up or down, depending on if it's positive or negative. So let's go through piece by piece and fill in our holes. Let's start with the midline. The midline can be found by taking the average of the max and the min. So to find the average, I'm going to take -9, add 3, and divide it by 2. So -9 plus 3 is -6, divided by 2 is -3. So this becomes our C value. And we can use that to plug into our equation in just a moment. The next thing I want to be able to do is find my amplitude. So the amplitude, we want to look at the total distance between the maximum and the minimum, and then divide that by 2. So if I look at the total distance between 3 and -9, I know that that distance is 12. So if I want to find my amplitude, I'm going to take that total distance of 12 divided by 2, which gives me 6. And just to check, if we go from the center line of -3 and subtract 6, that would give us our minimum value of -9. If we went from our C value or our midline value of -3 and added 6, that would put us at 3, which is our maximum. Now the last thing we want to be able to do is find our B value so that we can finish off our equation. If we remember from before, our period was equal to 2 pi divided by B. If we rearrange this formula, we could also see that B is equal to 2 pi over our period. So if we know our period, we can find our B value. Looking back at our graph here, the total distance between where the graph starts at its maximum to where it ends at its maximum is 4 pi thirds. So I'm going to come back over here and say my B value should equal the 2 pi, which is part of the equation, divided by 4 pi thirds. And then when I go ahead and invert that 4 pi thirds and multiply, I can see that this would equal 2 pi multiplied by 3 over 4 pi. Simplifying my fraction, the pi will simplify out. 2 goes into 4 twice, so then my B value here would equal 3 halves. So now we have an A value of 6, a B value of 3 halves, and a C value of -3. We can go ahead and combine all of these into our final equation. So I'm just going to substitute all these in and say y is equal to, our A value was 6, We know we had a cosine function, so I'll put cosine. B value we just found was 3/2. Put the x next to it. Our c value was -3, so I'll put in the -3. One last thing to check. With cosine, if it starts at its maximum, it is a positive value for the coefficient. If it starts at its minimum, it is a negative value for the coefficient. So if we look up here back at our function, we are starting at its maximum, so we can go ahead and leave the 6 as a positive. If we would have started down at the -9, we would say it's a -6 cosine instead of a +6 cosine. So this equation right here, y equals 6 cosine of 3/2 x minus 3, would be our final equation for this graph.